Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on how we are taking our own medicine here at Soliton Systems to try to fulfill some of the requirements of the upcoming EU General Data Protection Regulation, or better known as GDPR. My name is Jan Poulsen, and I work in pre-sales here at Soliton Systems. And I will try to make a little sense out of GDPR, how we see it, and something about our different solutions, how we're using those. Now, along the presentation, please enter questions, any questions that you may have, and I will try to answer as many of these questions as I possibly can at the end of the presentation. So please don't hold back. There's no such thing as stupid questions, only stupid answers. So today, as I said, what I would like to start with is just a few words about GDPR. I'm sure we all know what it is and so on, but a little bit seen from our point of view, what are the things that we have to consider in the type of organization that we are in. And exactly what are we doing to prepare for this? And specifically, this will be within the areas of network access and remote access, application access, and services that we use in the cloud. Now, Soliton is a global company, so we have some fun challenges. Our global headquarters is in Japan. So they are not under the GDPR, but because we are part of that organization, or because there are offices here in the UK, it does have some effects. Our European headquarters is located in Amsterdam, but our data center is located in Denmark, just outside of Copenhagen. And then we have offices all around the world. So there's quite a few things that we have to consider. And of course, as you probably all are aware, as of right now, we have 35 days left. That's 5 weeks, which means about 25 working days before GDPR takes full effect on May 25th. Now, what is GDPR? I'm sure we all know what it is, but compared to what we had before, we basically had a directive which is over 20 years old, where each member state was responsible for making their own legislation on how to implement this directive. Now, the GDPR. Some people hate it, some people like it, and I'm actually in one of the categories of those who like it because it is a common sense framework, a set of things that you should be doing even if the GDPR didn't exist. Because of course it is all about protecting the data, especially the personal data, the private information that we're storing. And if I, as a person, am willing to share private information or deeply personal information about myself with a company, then the company should, of course, also have the decency to take good care of that data, protect it the best they can, and to only use it for the purposes that it was meant to be used. So instead of having a checklist of do this, do that, and so on, GDPR kind of translates into a strategy for how do we manage data from the point of conception when we first create this data, receive this data, all the way through until the point where we no longer need the data and it is removed off of our systems. Now, what if you decide not to do GDPR? Well, there are some huge fines involved in this. Fines up to 20 million euros, or 4% of a global turnover, not of the offending office. So for instance, if we mess up with some of the data that we're storing in the data center here in Copenhagen, it is not 4% of the turnover of the European organization. It is 4% of the global. And I'm sure our owner and CEO, Dr. Kamada-san, would not be happy with us if he has to give away 4% of the turnover of our company. So of course, this is something that we take incredibly serious. But of course, there's also the other side of it, the liability that if you don't protect this data, you may not just have to pay a fine to the EU, but you may also be liable towards the persons or companies whose data you misappropriate or lose. And of course, none of us want to be on the front page of the news about not being able to handle our data. So these are the things that we're considering, that we're thinking about, and have been working on for quite some time to make sure that that we've taken care of all of this. So how do we do that? Well, there are a lot of considerations about how you control data, classify data, and so on, and all these sort of things. And that part of the business we are not involved in with or I should say, of course we are, but we don't have products and solutions in those areas. So the areas we are concentrating on here is network access security, remote access security, and cloud access security, because we want to know who we're letting onto our network, but not just who we're letting onto our network, what we're letting onto our network. Because, as I said, we are a global company, and we really use bring your own device extensively. People are more than welcome to get the devices that the company can provide: computers, phones, laptops, tablets, and so on. But you're also very welcome to bring your own. But of course, we want to know what we're letting onto the network, and depending on what kind of a device, we also want to control how you get access. So we need to know the device you're putting onto the network. We need to know who you are when you're getting onto the network. And then, of course, we need to control what you then have access to. But as a company that sells solutions and products, we also have a need to share data with our partners and with our customers. And sometimes we need our partners and customers to be able to send data to us. So we also have, we're also going to be talking about some solutions in that area, how we do that. So this can look like a bit of a complex drawing and so on. I promise not to talk too technically about all these things, because the idea is to try to understand not the nitty-gritty details of each of the solutions, but how they help us to do some of the things that GDPR is requiring of us. So the first solution I want to talk about is how do we identify devices and users, and how do we control the access that these are given into our infrastructure. So there are, of course, a lot of solutions out there. You can go for full-blown network access control and mobile device management and EMM and what all these different solutions are called today. And I'm sure if you are a large enterprise company, that is an absolute. But if you are a smaller or mid-sized company, maybe that is simply too much, requiring too many resources in your IT department, in your support department, and may cost a lot more than what you may want to spend. So what we provide is a way of issuing certificates to all your devices, and also issue certificates to the end user, which can be used in many different ways. So you can say, if you are if you're a Microsoft house, of course you can already do this with Active Directory, and through GPOs, so policies that are being pushed out on the different devices that are part of the domain. But what if you also want Mac users to access? What if you want people with different kinds of smartphones that are not running a Windows platform, tablets and so on, or any other kind of device you can imagine that might need some access to the network? You still want to be able to issue a certificate for that device. And even more importantly, what if there's no easy way to bring that device into your main office or onto your domain, because these devices are being used in remote offices or on the go or whatever it may be. It may actually be very complex to get these devices into the system in a way that you can identify them. So what our solution does here is that we, of course, in the internal network, we have a system running which can do many different things about using these certificates. For instance, there's the built-in radius protocol, which allows you to do 802.1x with all your switches and Wi-Fi's and so on, so that before a device is given access, it actually has to identify itself. There is an LDAP engine built in, so if you do not want to manage external users in your internal infrastructure, in your internal Active Directory, then you can manage it in the service of the NetaTest EPS, as this product is called. So now you can say that this is maybe somewhat the same as the way that you're already doing with AD, but the big difference here is that we also have a proxy component that goes into your DMZ, and that allows you to enroll external devices without them having to be physically present on your internal network. You can actually enroll external devices. Now, of course, that's also possible today if you're using an MDM product of some sort, but that means, yes, you have to implement MDM and everything that goes along with that. So what we provide for all the different types of devices that you might have is a software client to be installed on the end device, which allows a user to authenticate themselves to the system and then be issued the type of certificates that they are supposed to have for their device, for the user to be able to authenticate the user, to be able to encrypt and sign emails and so on. So this is all handled by a client on the endpoint device. So today, anybody who is connecting into wasn't there. Anybody who's connecting into our internal network has to have a certificate on their device to be able to get onto the network, and enable to in order to be able to authenticate against certain applications, then they also have to have a user certificate. And the benefit of using a client like this is also that you can change the certificates a lot more often than you normally would. So instead of have a lifetime of years on your certificate, you can have a lifetime of months instead, because it is very easy for the end user to have new certificates issued when needed. And as I said, it also does the 802.1x on the back end, which means that there may be a good reason why you need a full network access control system, but maybe in many cases, this is actually a first good step to controlling what devices that you're letting onto your network. And in some cases, with some of these NAC systems, we've come to know that they're not always completely full-featured, and in some instances, the NetaTest EPS is actually a good additional or supplement to your already existing NAC solutions to be able to expand it to all the different kind of devices you may be using on your network. So on some of the segments that we have, we don't want to enforce the certificates. And in our setup, it is specifically on our network that we're using for providing demos, for testing equipment, and for running our training classes on the different products we have. If we had to issue certificates all the time, we bring up a new server or revoke them, or we take down a server and so on. That would be a lot of time. And since we're not really having sensitive data on these network segments, we don't need to protect them fully with the NetaTest. So instead, we are using another solution also out of the NetaTest portfolio called the Labone. And I'm not going to do a lot of talk about this because we did a webinar a few months ago about the Labone. So I invite you to go to our website and take a look at that to get a better understanding of exactly how it works. But basically, what the Labone does is it learns what devices are on your network. And once it's learned about the devices that you've allowed on your network, it goes into a jamming mode so that any other device that attempts to connect to your network, whether it's through the wired LAN or through the Wi-Fi, will simply be blocked and will not be able to communicate with any other device on the network, and all the other devices on the network will not be able to communicate with this intruder on the system either. So the idea is that we know when something is trying to connect to our network, and the administrator will actually get an email that a device tried to connect to the network, and then the administrator can decide whether or not this device is allowed on the network, and then there's a simple interface to go and enable. Or you can even present a request form to the end user of this device, where they can ask for permission to get onto the network, explain why this device should be on the network, explain who they are and what they're doing with it. And then the administrator can again go in very easily and give access. If something needs to be removed from the network, it's just as easy. Go find the device you no longer want, click remove, and it's off your network. Now, if you have a bigger network, there's also a bigger brother to this called just the LAP. Which can be controlled. So the lab can be controlled by a central lab manager. And so you can have labs distributed out through all your networks within your organization and be able to know what gets onto the network and what doesn't. And one of the things about this is that instead of with the Labone, you are managing each unit individually. With this, you can manage everything centrally, so you can manage all the units you have around your network from one point. So this is, again, of course, it is not a complete network access control solution, but in many cases, this may be a really good solution to make certain that you are not having devices on your network that you don't want on your network, and when they do show up, it won't take you days or weeks to discover that these devices on the network. You will actually be notified right away that something is going on that needs your attention on the network. And then there is, once you're on the system, what are you, or onto the network or onto the infrastructure, what are you actually going to get access to? And this is where our remote access solutions come in, where we have everything from a way to securely browse, all the way to having more or less a full VPN access, but without the remote computer actually being part of your internal network or having an IP address or any kind of direct access to your internal network. So in sales, a lot of the time, what we need is access to information that is on our CRM system. We need access to brochures, data sheets, and other things like that that we need to send out and so on. So in many cases, we can actually do our work using our secure browser. which is again using the certificates that are issued to the devices and to the end user for two-factor authentication. And this allows us to access intranet servers, so anything we're running internally with a web front end on it. And there's also a secure file function in it, so that we are able to access some of our shares and download things that we need to email on or send on from whatever device we're using. So the neat thing about the secure browser is, of course, that again, just like with the key manager for handling certificates, this is also a client that is installed on the endpoint. So we're not trying to get a a multi-purpose standard browser to do something very specific. We have a very specific browser client that you can control completely what access you're given, and to know that anything you watching or downloading into this browser stays within the browser, and once you're done using the browser, all the data is cleaned out when the browser is closed, so you're not leaving anything behind on the device, and yet your end user has full access to everything they need. If you need a little more access to than just browser access, we have our Secure and Connect solution. And Secure and Connect solution is again a client that you run. In this case, it is Windows and Mac only, so there's no smartphone client for that. I'll get to that in the next products I'll talk about. But in this case, it's for Windows and Mac, and it allows you a little more access than just browser. So you can also use remote desktop, Citrix. You can use Unix type tools if you need to do SSH or something else of that style. And there are a number of full fat application clients that you can run through it as well. And once again, the remote computer is separated off the network with a gateway, just the same way as with the secure browser. So the remote device gets to the gateway, and then the gateway is handling all the traffic on the inside. And then we have our secure and containerized solution. And this is when you need to work with the data on the remote device. So here we're talking about having data that is confidential, data that you need to protect according to the GDPR. So what we do here is that we put everything into a secure container. And there are two versions of this, one for mobile devices, so that is our Secure Container DME. And where we are probably different from most of the other vendors out there is that this is a single application. And I know a lot of the others also say, yes, we do this in a single application, but when you dig down, if you have to edit the document, it is a different application. If you have to download documents or files, it's a different application again, and so on. With the secure container, we put everything inside the secure container. And the reasoning behind this, of course, is that now you only have to control that one application. You don't have to control the whole device. And this is all of these different products are quite a big reason behind why we are so much in favor of bring your own device and allowing the users to choose whether they want a company provided device or to bring their own device, because we know what devices we're letting onto the network, and we can separate I said that wrong. We know that we're not letting the devices onto the network, but we're allowing the users access to work with what they need to work with. So the secure container is, of course, mail, calendar, contacts, and all these things you need. But it is also a secure file browser that allows you to download files and documents. There is an editor built in so that you can edit these documents before sending them out or loading them back onto the system. And there is a browser, a secure browser function built into it as well, so that you can also run browser applications. On the PC side of things for Windows and Mac computers, We have a bootable operating system. So when you boot up on this on the computer, we actually disable the hard disks in the computer you're using. So there's no way that you can accidentally leave data behind or pick anything up from the computer we're using. And then everything runs inside this booted operating system. It includes all the different application clients that you need. Um, and in common for all these solutions, as I said before, is that everything goes through a gateway. So we're controlling exactly what is being permitted in this gateway. So the end users cannot really do anything to promote their privileges, to get access to anything that is not defined in the system. So in other words, we're helping the users to do the right thing. And then finally, we of course have the need to share data, and there are a lot of solutions out of today to share data with external entities. But most of these are, of course, cloud-based, like Dropbox and OneDrive and so on. And that worries us a little bit because we really would like to be in control of the data. And we also really would like to know that the data is only on these sharing devices for as long as it needs to be. So one of the things that this solution does is that when you are sharing a file with somebody, you have the ability to set the lifetime of that share. In other words, how many days or how many times or a combination of both. And when that limit is reached, the system automatically removes the files again. So the files only exist in the system for as long as they're needed. So this gives us the ability to, for instance, share software or large presentations or anything else that we may need to share with external entities and still maintain control over who we are sharing this with. So the way it works is that you upload the files to your account on the system, and then you point to who you want to receive this. They receive an email with a secure link in it to download these files. And when they have exceeded the limit of the amount of time they can download this with the time frame they can download it in, then it's removed off the system, and you don't have to think about it or worry about it. But there's also another nice feature in it, and that is that we can send a request mail to somebody to allow them to upload to our system. So, for instance, our support department is using this when they need log files or other information to help them work on a problem of some sort. Then the end user, the customer, the partner can actually upload data that we can then pull off the system as well. And this is an on-premise solution, so we have really total control of the files coming in and out of the system here. So that's a little bit about how we are using our own solutions to control data, to know who is accessing different things, who are getting into our infrastructure, what applications they're allowed to access, and under what conditions they can do that, and so on. And of course, all of these systems include complete logging behind them, so you can go into details if you do end up having an incident anyway, so that you can figure out exactly what happened. So with that, I am going to jump to questions. And let's see if we got any questions here. There's our questions. There's our questions. Please, so please, if there are any questions at all, just send them in. So there's a few here. Here we go. So, are your solutions really a replacement for network access control? No. Of course, we are not a full replacement for a complete network access control system. We can be a supplement to an existing access control system, especially if there are some complications of getting certain types of devices onto or be controlled in a system like that. Of course, the Lab1 is also not a replacement, but in many cases it can be good enough, especially for field offices and so on, where you may not want to extend your full NAC solution out to. Is there a recommendation from BGR to use certificates instead of username and password? No, there actually isn't, and that's the point I was making initially about this more being a framework about how to do this correctly, how to behave correctly. So no, there's not an absolute requirement that you should have certificates, but this is a way of knowing who you're letting onto your infrastructure so you can document who was accessing the system, when were they accessing the system, and what were they authorized to do when they were onto the system. So to me, the really neat thing about GDPR is that they are not forcing a solution or a product onto us, but they're telling us how we should behave. And then, of course, it is up to us to decide how can we best do this? How can we best fulfill these requirements? What are the steps we want to take, and what are the solutions and products that we would like to use to do that? Oh, this is a very, very long question. I think I'm going to take this offline because this is quite long. So sorry about that, sir. I hope you know who you are. So we had another question about the secure container. Oh, there's someone here who who doesn't really believe that it is one app, and I completely understand that. If you have worked with other solutions, of course, you know that many companies claim to be one app, but then when you actually start working with it, if you do need to browse a link, for instance, in an email you received, then it reverts you to whatever the default browser is on the system. If you need to download a file, then you need to go to a different client to do that. Or if you need to edit, then you may be forced to use the built-in editing capabilities and so on. So I completely understand this question and why it may be hard to believe. But DME, the secure container product, really is everything inside one application. So there is a complete mail client, calendar client, contacts, built into this client. There is the we call it App Box, which is what allows you to connect to your web apps. It is all done within the secure container. If you're using full HTML5 apps, which can include databases stored locally, those are also stored inside the secure container. So everything goes into the secure container. If you're using the file download functionality, the files are stored within the container. And when you're using the edit facilities, they're being read inside the container. The editor is inside the container, and anything you store is inside the container. And unless explicitly permitted in the system, you really can't get this data out of the system. So you cannot accidentally have your business contacts show up in the private contacts on the device that's being used, or the business calendar being shared with the private calendar, unless, of course, this is something you wish to do. And in that case, you can enable it. So you are able to use third-party applications outside the secure container, but you have to expressly permit that to happen. So basically, the secure container DME product is a complete business app inside one single application, and you only manage that application if, for some reason, you need to get rid of it. An employee leaves or loses the device or whatever. You delete the application. You do not clean out the device. And I'm a little bit over time, but I'm going to take one more question for those of you who are still on. And that is whether or not the solutions actually work on all platforms. And yes, I get that. That is also one of the things that some of the competition say they do, and then when you dig into it, then maybe it doesn't work fully on all platforms. But yes, we the key manager for issuing certificates to device and users run on all types of smartphones, tablets, Windows machines, and Mac-based machines. The secure container DME product is on, again, all types of smartphones and on all types of tablets. And the equivalent, the Secure Connect Geon product is running on both Windows and Mac. So no matter what your needs are, there is a product that fits into the platform that you're using. So with that, I think I'm going to, because I'm already about 5 minutes over time, I'm going to say thank you to everyone who joined this webinar. We will be sending out an email with links to this webinar so that you can view it at any time you want or share it with colleagues. And we will also include a link to the presentation used today so that you are more than welcome to use this any way that you can as well. So once again, thank you very much for your time. And if you need more information, grab a hold of your sales representative or one of us from pre-sales, and we will do our best to help you out. Thank you very much, and goodbye.